wave in the 60s. So this is a pretty powerful benefit for the argument in favor of the free availability of cannabis in a society. It has beneficial effects, which are not only a little bit beneficial, as, for example, creativity, enhanced health, or something like that. It aids the diaphanous web, the communication, the empathy, the appreciation for another view, the possibility of resonance between one's ideas and other ideas, opening up creativity on the scale of cultural evolution in personal relationship, the way in which sexual experience is enhanced, for example, the aphrodisiac effect of cannabis in the right dose. Just one example of its overall synthetic role. It is medicine for cultural evolution, and that's my experience. But if you want to know why I stopped, I think, during the time that I did make friends with cannabis, I was also doing LSD a lot, and then mushrooms a lot, and other psychedelics and so on. So it was sort of a package deal. I found it convenient finally to experience with the other side, an alternate behavior in which there would be a focusing on a tiny point of consciousness to a kind of focus and concentration maintained over a long period of time, which brought its own benefit, another kind of benefit. So after synthesizing and deconstructing armor and obtaining new views over vaster territories in some ways, you want to produce a product, like proving a mathematical theorem, which sometimes takes 7 years of concentration on a single point in consciousness. This kind of activity for me seemed to be enhanced by abstinence from everything, from newspapers, from other people's stories, from dinner party talk and so on, and from large parts of my own consciousness, just focusing on a point. I found experimenting with every different variation of behavior that in order to accomplish my goals, say around 1980 when I quit all psychedelics for a while, trying all these experiments in varying parameters, I found that the least of everything, indulging in a process in India they call syncretizing, giving up everything and then bragging about that. This brought about more and more increase of the performance from myself that I was seeking at that time. And this is like an elite athlete searching for ultimate performance, of trying to break some kind of world record for focusing on a point. It even what I was doing was difficult and required rigid discipline. I invoked these ideas of yogic discipline that I had learned in India, and they're responsible for a certain kind of ultimate performance, as cannabis and other psychedelics enhance a completely different kind of ultimate performance. And I suppose this is, I guess you could say, another binary of focusing and defocusing mental states. In my current state, now more than 10 years old, I realize is approaching the breaking point, and soon it may be necessary for me to relax on a fairly massive scale in order to regain novelty in my approach.
How does it work for you, Rupert, in the process of relating to the problem of creativity?
Well, I think there are two things I'd say. One is that it seems to create a much greater sense of ability to concentrate. So contrary to your experience that concentration is easier without it,
I found that one of the effects is a greatly enhanced ability to concentrate, whether it's listening to music, to concentrate on the music and not be distracted by other things, or whether it's reading something and thinking about the ideas and following a chain of thought to try to concentrate on that, or a line of exploration and conversation, or in writing to concentrate on the flow of thought and onto the expression of the words and the way in which the language can express the idea, the tremendous concentration that's required in writing something, at least which I find is necessary for writing books. Or thinking out the structure of a chapter or of an argument. I find that it's a great aid to concentration, partly because, as Terence says, it makes it possible to enter a state where these become things of importance, and the everyday concerns about checkbooks, banks, mailing a letter, this kind of thing becomes secondary importance. So it may be partly by removing the niggling preoccupations of mundane existence that it becomes easier to concentrate. The second effect I found, which I have a great deal to thank the cannabis plant for, is that in relation to places, the spirit of places, the spirit of trees, the spirits of plants, and the spirits of sacred places too, temples, cathedrals and so on, that it gives an enormous enhancement of the sense of connection and relationship, which is otherwise normally filtered out by this chattering internal dialogue of the banal kind, which goes on much of the time. So that, I suppose, would fit with what Terence says about the dissolution of boundaries. There's a much greater sense of connectedness. But there are two other things that come in train with this. One, as Terence noted, a suppression of dreams. Whenever I'm not a constant smoker, of the kind that you were, Terence, more sort of occasional. But in periods when I don't smoke at all, then I notice a much greater intensity of dreams. I remember more dreams. They seem much more vivid. Periods when I'm smoking, I don't remember dreams at all, usually. So there is this curious suppression of dreams, and I don't really know what to make of that. There's also an effect which I think is a negative effect of cannabis, and which is one of the reasons why governments and industrial civilizations try to suppress it, which is that because it produces a kind of physical relaxation which allows the mind to expand and journey and one's psyche to connect and so on. This, I think, the other side of that coin is that there's a kind of toning down and tuning down of the whole springs of action of the body, so we're perfectly content to sit around doing not very much. It doesn't produce a tremendous urge to go and empty the dustbin or do chores around the house and that kind of thing. And indeed it's this kind of activity which is easily identified by external observers as physical laziness, which is the reason for its bad reputation in Kashmir, for example. I was staying in Srinagar on stage, and I had an agricultural project in Srinagar, and I was staying with a friend who was studying Kashmiri Shaivism. So I had my job, and then I was staying with this fellow, and we were talking about this, and he said, well, have you ever been to one of these shrines where, Sufi shrines, dargahs, where cannabis smoking is tolerated as part of the standard pattern of society, but where you see why there is a negative image of this hashish smoking in such societies, which you also get in Egypt and so on. I mean, some of the middle-class image of cannabis smoking in India and in Malaya and elsewhere is a bit like the middle-class image of winos and methylated spirit drinkers and so on in the West. We went to the shrine, which was the shrine of a Sufi saint, And attached to it was a smoking room, and this room was full of people smoking hashish, sitting around the walls, and there was a place there where you could buy it. So we sat down and had a puff, and it was a dreadful revelation to me when the man sitting next to me spoke to me in Urdu, and he got bleary eyes, he got several days' growth of stubble, he was in ragged, smelly clothes. He called out a picture of himself, a kind of identity card thing, himself smart in a uniform, said, "I used to be a bus driver until I started smoking. Now look at me. That's what it's done to me," he said as he took another puff. "I've lost my family. I've lost everything." And so there was a kind of the negative, the shadow side of it, which I saw then more clearly than ever before or since, which certainly fitted with what rather prim middle-class people in Malaya and India and in other Oriental countries have told me about its habitual usages, which made it clear how it could accumulate this negative image, how it could cause alarm in people who don't want the habit to spread in modern, efficient industrial societies. And this is certainly associated in my own experience with the fact that the mental expansion is bought at the price of a certain physical lethargy. So I wonder if that's been your experience.
Actually, it hasn't. I'm interested in the question. It has to be said that cannabis is chemically complicated. It's not simply one cannabinol. There are a number of these cannabinoids, and various strains have various ratios and proportions of these things. But for instance, I find when I'm writing books that I can only write for about 3 hours, and then either the day is finished for work, or I smoke hashish, and 20 minutes later I'm ready to go 2 hours more at it. And I can do that twice in a day. If I judiciously control my intake of cannabis, it gives me a second wind and a third wind to go forward with creative activity. Now, if you just sit down and smoke into stupor, you're not going to be able to do this. But if you just stop this now tiresome and boring activity and have a couple of puffs, and then you sit and you have a few interesting thoughts, and you feel completely revitalized and able to go back to it. And I've noticed this not only with creative work, but with physical work. For instance, if I'm stacking wood, I'll stack half a cord of wood, and then I'll either think, well, I'll finish stacking it tomorrow, and then I'll go in and smoke some cannabis. And a half hour later I'll say, well, why wait till tomorrow? I'll just go and finish it right now. I think you all know Paul Bowles' book, or the statement that a puff of kief makes a man strong as 20 camels in the courtyard. There's something to this. It's not simple. It can turn you into a stupor, sort of lazy, loutish person. On the other hand, it can allow you to do very hard work for very long periods of time. So you sort of have to manage it. And I think a lot of people don't learn to manage it. One of the things that's always put against marijuana is that it destroys short-term, or it destroys your memory. Well, I dare say I have a prodigious memory, and I'm the heaviest smoker I've ever known, and my memory for dates, names of painters, writers, literary and scientific minutiae, odd vocabularies in specialized areas is very great, and I don't credit cannabis with that, but I certainly can't believe that it has damaged my ability to do this. Now, it is true that sometimes in a conversation you will lose your thread, but on the other hand, it gives you an equal power to brilliantly fake the situation and to pick up the thread and re-stitch together the narrative. The other point I might make that we haven't mentioned yet, or 2 points actually, is that I think it gives an